They said Damien DeLuca bought every red rose in Manhattan at Valentine's Eve, but nobody knew he planned to burn them all. Snow fell over Fifth Avenue in slow, silent waves, covering black cars and glowing streetlights like the city was trying to hide itself beneath white velvet. I stood outside the Grand Astoria Hotel with my violin case pressed against my chest, staring at the gold-lit entrance while freezing wind slipped beneath the thin sleeves of my red dress. My fingers were numb already. "Good start, Claire." The text message from my mother sat unanswered on my phone screen. Past due notice. Again. Hospital bills didn't care that it was Valentine's Day. They didn't care that I was 24 years old and playing violin at parties for rich strangers while wondering how many more weeks we could keep our apartment. A black SUV rolled past the entrance slowly enough to make every valet stand straighter. Men in dark coats stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk with cold eyes before opening the rear door. Then he appeared. Damien DeLuca. I didn't know his name yet. Only the feeling. Tall. Dark wool coat perfectly tailored over broad shoulders. Black gloves. Black tie. Black everything. He moved through the snowfall like he owned the night itself. People stopped talking when he passed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like instinct. Like prey recognizing something dangerous. His face looked carved from stone under the amber hotel lights. Dark hair brushed back neatly. Sharp jawline. A faint scar near his temple. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch. They looked empty. Not cruel. Worse. Empty. Like someone had taken every warm thing out of him years ago and left the shell standing behind. One of the valets hurried toward him holding a bouquet of roses. At least 50 stems wrapped in black ribbon. Damien stared at them for 3 long seconds before speaking without emotion. "Burn them." The valet froze. "Sir." "All of them." His voice stayed calm. Quiet. Somehow that made it colder. Snow melted against my eyelashes as I watched the young valet nod nervously and carry the flowers away. I should have looked away. I should have gone inside and started tuning my violin like everyone else. Instead, I kept staring at the man who looked like grief wearing a $10,000 coat. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Because I knew that look. The look of someone surviving instead of living. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glowed like gold stars above hundreds of guests dressed in diamonds and silk. Couples laughed beside towers of champagne while a jazz band played near the marble staircase. Valentine's Eve in Manhattan. Expensive perfume. Crystal glasses. Fake smiles. I stood near the stage with the other musicians, adjusting the strings of my violin while trying not to think about overdue rent notices stuffed in my purse. Then I saw him again. Damien stood alone on the upper balcony overlooking the ballroom, one hand resting against the railing while everyone carefully avoided getting too close. The city lights behind him blurred through falling snow beyond the glass windows. He looked like a ghost haunting his own empire. One of the violinists beside me whispered his name under her breath. "That's Damien DeLuca." Another musician lowered his voice immediately. "Don't stare." Too late. Because the moment I looked up again, his eyes found mine across the entire ballroom. Everything inside me stopped. The music. The noise. The movement. Gone. Only those dark eyes remained. Cold. Exhausted. Watching me like he'd just seen something impossible. My hands trembled slightly against the violin bow. I looked away first. Big mistake. Because 30 seconds later, a man in a black suit appeared beside me and spoke quietly into his earpiece while never taking his eyes off me. "Mr. DeLuca would like to speak with you." My stomach dropped. "I think you have the wrong person." The man glanced toward the balcony. Damien was still staring directly at me. Then the guard spoke 4 words that made my heartbeat stumble. Bring her to me. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it should have. Nobody spoke. Not the guard beside me. Not the woman in the black dress standing near the mirrored wall with an earpiece hidden beneath her hair. Only the quiet hum of the elevator and the pounding of my heartbeat filled the silence. I tightened my grip around my violin case until my fingers hurt. This was insane. Rich powerful men did not summon random musicians to private floors in Manhattan hotels unless something had gone terribly wrong. The elevator doors opened into a private lounge wrapped in gold light and silence. No music. No laughing guests. Just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snowy Manhattan and a single man standing near the fireplace with one hand in his coat pocket. Damien DeLuca did not turn around immediately when I entered. He stood there staring into the fire while snow drifted beyond the glass behind him. For a second, I thought about running. Then the doors closed softly behind me and the sound snapped something inside my chest tight again. Damien finally looked at me over his shoulder. Those dark eyes moved slowly from my face to the violin case in my hand and back again. Calm. Controlled. Exhausted. Leave us, he said quietly. The guards disappeared without hesitation. Suddenly the room felt too large and too small at the same time. I swallowed hard. If this is about the performance downstairs, I can explain. I was not staring at you. I mean. I was, but not in a weird way. Brilliant, Claire. Absolutely brilliant. One corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. You are nervous. Most people get nervous when strangers in $1,000 suits escort them into private penthouses. That suit costs more than that. I blinked at him. He delivered the sentence without humor. Like a weather report. I looked away first. Again. Big mistake. Because now I noticed things I had missed before. The untouched glass of whiskey near the fireplace. The black velvet box sitting open on the table beside him. A diamond ring inside. My stomach twisted quietly. Valentine's Eve. Morning. Suddenly the emptiness in his eyes made sense. Damien walked closer slowly, the polished floor silent beneath his shoes. Every instinct in my body said dangerous. But not the kind that shouted. The quiet kind. The kind that already knew it could destroy everything around it without raising its voice. He stopped a few feet away. Close enough for me to catch the scent of cedarwood and cold winter air still. Clinging to his coat. Why were you crying downstairs? The question caught me off guard. What? Outside the hotel. His gaze never left mine. You were standing in the snow pretending to read a text message. Heat rushed into my cheeks because he was right. I had been crying before entering the ballroom. I just had not realized anyone noticed. My mother is sick, I admitted softly. Bills. Work. Life. Damien studied me in silence so long I started wishing I had lied instead. You still came tonight. I needed the money. Something shifted in his expression then. Not pity. Something quieter. Recognition maybe. I looked toward the windows to escape the intensity of his stare. Snow covered the city below like white ash. Beautiful from far away. Lonely up close. Why did you bring me here? I whispered. Damien glanced toward the black velvet ring box on the table. His jaw tightened slightly before he answered. Tonight was supposed to be the worst night of the year. His voice dropped lower. Rougher somehow. Then I saw you standing in the ballroom wearing red while everyone else looked dead. My breath caught. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch me. Just enough to make my heartbeat stumble again. Tell me your name, he said quietly. Claire Bennett. He repeated it slowly like he was testing how it sounded inside the silence surrounding him. Claire. The fire crackled softly behind him. Snow drifted beyond the glass. And for the first time since entering that room, Damien DeLuca looked at me like a man trying very hard to remember how to breathe. People think silence feels peaceful until they stand inside the kind that grief creates. Damien poured himself another glass of whiskey after saying my name, but he did not drink it. He just stood near the fire holding the crystal glass while orange light flickered across his face. I noticed then that his hands were steady. Too steady. Like someone who controlled every emotion with brutal precision because letting even one slip free might destroy him. I shifted uncomfortably beside the piano near the windows, still clutching my violin case like it could somehow protect me from whatever this night was becoming. "You can sit down," Damien said quietly. "I am fine standing." "You are lying." His eyes lifted toward me again. Calm. Observant. "Your feet hurt." Heat rushed into my face because they did. The cheap heels I borrowed from another violinist were half a size too small and slowly killing me. Damien noticed my hesitation before walking toward the long velvet couch near the fireplace. "Relax, Claire. If I intended to harm you, we would not be discussing footwear." I sat carefully while trying not to look nervous. Huge mistake. Because now that I was still, I noticed everything. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to someone missing. White roses arranged near framed photographs. Candles burned low across dark marble shelves. One portrait rested above the fireplace itself. A woman with dark hair smiling at the camera while Damien stood beside her in a black tuxedo. Younger. Happier. Alive in a way the man before me no longer seemed capable of being. My chest tightened quietly. "She was beautiful," I whispered before thinking better of it. Damien went completely still. The fire cracked softly between us. Snow drifted against the windows behind him in slow white spirals. Her name was Elena. His voice remained even, but something underneath it fractured slightly around her name. "We were supposed to get married on Valentine's Day." I looked down immediately. "I am sorry. Everyone says that." He finally took a sip of whiskey. "Most of them are lying." The honesty in his tone startled me more than anger would have. I studied the amber liquid swirling slowly inside his glass. "And you think I am lying too?" Damien stared at me for several seconds before answering. "No," the word landed softly between us. "Dangerous somehow." Because he meant it. Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different. Less sharp. Outside, snow covered the city in silver light while distant traffic glowed beneath the skyline like rivers of gold. I rubbed my hands together quietly for warmth. Damien noticed immediately. He always noticed everything. Without a word, he crossed the room and draped his coat gently over my shoulders. The fabric still carried traces of cold winter air mixed with cedarwood and smoke. Expensive. Heavy. Warm. I looked up at him in surprise. "You do not have to do that." "I know." His voice lowered slightly. "But you are shivering." Nobody had noticed small things about me in a very long time. Not the exhaustion beneath makeup. Not trembling hands. Not fear hidden behind polite smiles. Yet somehow this man saw everything without me saying a word. That should have terrified me more than it did. Damien moved toward the windows again, one hand sliding into his pocket while the city glowed below him. "Play something for me." I blinked. "What?" "Your violin." He glanced toward the case beside me. "Play." I hesitated before opening it slowly. The familiar scent of polished wood steadied my breathing a little. Music always had. Even when life felt impossible. I lifted the violin beneath my chin carefully and drew the bow across the strings. Soft notes filled the penthouse immediately. Slow. Melancholy. Honest. Damien closed his eyes the moment the music began. And for the first time that night, the grief inside him stopped looking angry. It looked tired. Deeply tired. I kept playing while snow fell beyond the glass and candlelight flickered softly across the room. Then Damien spoke without opening his eyes. "Do you know what scares me most about tonight, Claire?" My fingers slowed slightly against the strings. "What?" He finally looked at me again. And the loneliness in his expression nearly broke my heart. "For the first time in 3 years," he said quietly, "I did not want to leave when I saw you. Music changes the way people look at each other." Before that night, Damien DeLuca had watched me like a mystery. After the violin stopped, he looked at me like a man standing too close to fire after years trapped in winter. The final note faded softly into the penthouse silence while my fingers trembled slightly against the strings. I lowered the violin slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. Damien still stood near the windows without moving. The city lights painted silver across his dark suit while snow drifted behind him endlessly. He had not touched his drink again. "What was that piece called?" he asked quietly. "It does not really have a name." I carefully placed the violin back into its case. "My mother used to hum it when I could not sleep." His gaze shifted toward me slowly. "And did it help?" "Sometimes." I smiled faintly before the smile disappeared on its own. "Sometimes people stay tired no matter how much they rest." Something dark flickered behind his eyes at that sentence. Recognition again. Too much recognition. Damien looked away first this time. "You should eat." I blinked in surprise when a woman in black entered silently through a side door carrying 2 plates of food. I had not even heard the elevator. She placed everything carefully on the dining table before disappearing again without speaking. The entire world around Damien moved like choreography. Quiet. Precise. Controlled. I stared at the untouched meal in front of me. Fresh pasta. Bread still warm. Strawberries dipped in chocolate arranged beside crystal glasses. Rich people food. The kind that looked too expensive to touch. "I cannot afford to pay for this," I admitted awkwardly. Damien almost smiled again. "Almost. Claire." His voice lowered slightly. "You are not being charged for dinner." Heat rushed into my cheeks while I picked up the fork carefully. I had not eaten since noon and my stomach betrayed me immediately with a quiet growl. Damien noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. Instead of embarrassing me, he looked strangely relieved when I started eating. Like seeing another person do something normal grounded him somehow. The fire crackled softly nearby while snow continued falling beyond the windows. For a few minutes neither of us spoke. It should have felt uncomfortable. It did not. Then I noticed the locked hallway near the staircase upstairs. One light remained on at the very end. Warm and golden against the darkness surrounding it. "Nobody goes up there," Damien said suddenly. I nearly dropped my fork. "I did not ask anything." "You were wondering." His eyes remained fixed on me calmly. The room at the end belonged to Elena. Silence settled heavily between us again. I looked down at my plate carefully. "You still keep everything the same?" "Yes." One word. Flat. Controlled. But grief wrapped around it anyway. I glanced toward the staircase once more. "That sounds painful." Damien leaned back slowly in his chair. Firelight moved across the sharp angles of his face while exhaustion darkened his expression again. "Pain is useful." "How?" He studied me quietly before answering. "It reminds you what love cost." The honesty in his voice made my chest ache unexpectedly. Because nobody should sound that empty while talking about someone they loved. Snow tapped softly against the glass windows while distant sirens echoed far below in the city streets. New York kept moving no matter who was grieving inside it. I wrapped both hands around the warm tea beside my plate and watched steam curl into the air. "You know," I said softly, "for someone everyone seems terrified of, you do not act the way I expected." Damien stared at me carefully. "And what exactly did you expect?" I hesitated. "Someone colder." He looked toward the fire for several long seconds before answering. "Claire, cold people do not mourn for 3 years." The room fell silent again after that. Deep silence. Honest silence. Then his phone buzzed sharply against the table. Damien glanced down at the screen and something changed instantly in his face. The softness disappeared. The warmth vanished. Just like that, the man sitting across from me became dangerous again. He stood slowly while slipping the phone back into his pocket. "You need to stay here tonight." My heartbeat stumbled. "What?" Damien looked toward the snowy windows, jaw tightening slightly. "Because someone downstairs just asked my staff why a girl in a red dress was brought upstairs to my private floor." The atmosphere in the penthouse changed so fast it made my skin go cold. 1 second Damien looked tired. The next, he looked like the man people whispered about in dark corners of Manhattan restaurants. Calm. Dangerous. Untouchable. He adjusted the cuff of his black shirt slowly while staring toward the windows, every trace of warmth disappearing behind controlled silence. "Who is asking about me?" I whispered carefully. Damien ignored the question at first. Instead, he walked toward the fireplace and pressed 2 fingers briefly against his temple like exhaustion physically hurt him. "You should not have been noticed tonight." "That sounds terrifying when you say it like that." One of his guards appeared near the elevator without making a sound. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark suit. The kind of man who probably never smiled. "The ballroom is secured," he said quietly. "But Victor Kane is still downstairs." Damien's jaw tightened slightly at the name. "How much does he know?" "Only that a woman came upstairs." Silence. Heavy silence. I stood slowly from the dining table, my pulse beating too fast now. "I think I should leave." Both men looked at me immediately. Damien's expression hardened. No, the word landed harder than it should have. Not loud. Just absolute. I crossed my arms tightly against myself. "You cannot just keep me here because some random man asked questions. Victor Kane is not random." Damien's voice remained calm, but something underneath it sharpened dangerously. "And tonight is not as simple as you think." Snow continued drifting beyond the windows while Manhattan glittered below us in silver and gold. Somewhere far beneath the penthouse, music from the ballroom still played faintly through the floors. People dancing. Laughing. Falling in love. Meanwhile I stood inside a private suite arguing with a man who looked like heartbreak wrapped in expensive fabric. "Then explain it to me," I said softly. Damien stared at me for several long seconds before finally answering. "There are people who pay attention when something matters to me." My chest tightened unexpectedly at those words. "And suddenly I matter?" His gaze lowered slightly. "That is what concerns me." The honesty in his voice hit harder than manipulation ever could have. Because Damien did not sound proud of it. He sounded frustrated by it. Like emotions were problems he no longer trusted himself to survive. The guard's earpiece crackled softly. Damien glanced toward him. "No one enters this floor without my permission." "Understood." The man disappeared again. Just like that. Silent. Efficient. I exhaled slowly once the elevator doors closed behind him. "This is insane." Damien looked at me quietly. "Probably." A tired smile almost touched my mouth before fading again. I wrapped his coat tighter around my shoulders, suddenly aware of how late it had become. Candlelight flickered softly through the room while snow painted the city white outside the glass. The penthouse no longer felt frightening exactly. Lonely, maybe. Haunted. But not frightening. That realization scared me more than anything else tonight. Damien loosened his tie slightly before sitting down near the fireplace, exhaustion finally creeping visibly into his posture. You should sleep for a few hours. I do not think I can sleep here. Most people cannot. His voice lowered. I cannot either. I watched him carefully then. Really watched him. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The untouched whiskey. The way his fingers pressed absently against the scar near his temple when he thought too hard. This man had not rested in a very long time. When was the last time you slept? I asked quietly. Damien looked into the fire instead of at me. I do not remember. Something inside my chest hurt unexpectedly at that answer. Because he did not say it dramatically. He said it like fact. Simple. Empty fact. I hesitated before opening my violin case again. What are you doing? He asked softly. Helping you remember. I lifted the violin carefully beneath my chin while firelight danced across polished wood. Damien watched me silently from the chair near the fireplace, shadows moving across his face as the first soft notes filled the room again. Slower this time. Gentler. Outside, snow covered Manhattan in silence while the most feared man I had ever met finally closed his eyes. And sometime between one song and the next, Damien DeLuca fell asleep listening to me breathe. The strange thing about lonely people is how quickly they memorize kindness. I woke up sometime after 4 in the morning with Damien's coat still wrapped around my shoulders and dying embers glowing softly inside the fireplace. For one disoriented second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw him asleep across the room. Damien still sat in the armchair near the fire exactly where I had left him. One hand rested loosely against the armrest while his head leaned slightly back, dark hair falling messily across his forehead now. Without the sharp focus in his eyes, he looked younger. Human. Tired in a way that made my chest ache unexpectedly. Manhattan glowed blue beyond the windows before sunrise, the city quieter now beneath fresh snow. I stood carefully, trying not to wake him. Bad idea. The moment my shoes touched the marble floor, Damien's eyes opened instantly. Alert. Focused. Dangerous again in less than a heartbeat. I froze beside the couch. Sorry, I whispered. He blinked once slowly before relaxing slightly when he realized it was me. You should still be asleep. His voice sounded rough from exhaustion. So should you. A faint silence settled between us while snow drifted softly outside. Damien rubbed one hand across his jaw before glancing toward the untouched whiskey glass still sitting near the fireplace. I did not mean to fall asleep. I know. His eyes lifted toward me carefully. That almost never happens. Something vulnerable moved beneath those words. Tiny. Fragile. Like he hated admitting it out loud. I tightened his coat around myself while crossing toward the windows. The skyline looked beautiful before dawn. Cold silver buildings stretching endlessly beneath pale winter light. You really stayed awake for 3 years? I asked quietly. Damien stood slowly from the chair. Not completely. He walked beside me near the glass, hands resting loosely in his pockets. I slept enough to survive. That is not the same thing. He looked down at me then. Long quiet. Honest. No, he admitted softly. It is not. My phone suddenly buzzed against the table beside the couch, making both of us glance toward it immediately. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach tighten. Ethan. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. Damien noticed the shift in my expression instantly. Of course he did. Who is Ethan? Nobody. Claire. His voice lowered slightly. Calm. Dangerous in a completely different way now. I grabbed the phone quickly before Ethan could call again. He is just someone I used to date. Damien studied me carefully while snow reflected pale light across his face. Used to. I looked away first. People do not always leave when relationships end. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Damien noticed something I had forgotten about completely. The fading bruise near my wrist where my sleeve shifted slightly beneath his coat. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatic. Worse. Controlled. Cold. Who hurt you? The question landed quietly between us. I crossed my arms immediately, hiding the bruise again. It is nothing. Damien stepped closer slowly. Not threatening. Somehow that made it more intense. Claire. My pulse stumbled. You do not have to look at me like that. Like what? Like you are trying not to break something. His jaw tightened once. Barely noticeable unless someone was watching carefully. I was watching carefully now. Damien looked toward my phone resting silent on the table. Does he still contact you? I hated how embarrassed my voice sounded when I answered. Sometimes. And the bruises? Heat rushed painfully into my face. Sometimes. The room became very still after that. Outside, snow continued falling softly over Manhattan while early morning light slowly filled the penthouse in pale silver. Damien stared at the city for several long seconds before speaking again. You are afraid of him. It was not a question. I swallowed hard. I am trying not to be. He nodded once slowly like he understood something important now. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. What are you doing? I asked carefully. Damien's expression never changed while he typed one short message. Making sure he never contacts you again. Fear flickered through me immediately. Damien. He looked at me calmly. Too calmly. Nobody who leaves bruises on you gets repeated access to your life, Claire. Then his phone buzzed softly in his hand. He glanced down at the screen before slipping it back into his pocket. It is handled. Power is terrifying when it moves quietly. Damien never raised his voice after sending that message. He did not threaten anyone. He did not explain what handled meant. Somehow that made it worse. Morning light slowly spilled across the penthouse while Manhattan woke beneath fresh snow, but the warmth from earlier had disappeared completely. I stood near the windows clutching my phone tightly while Damien adjusted the cufflinks on his black shirt with calm precision. Like removing someone from my life was as ordinary as checking the weather. You cannot control people like that, I whispered finally. Damien glanced toward me. I can. The honesty in his answer unsettled me more than arrogance would have. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, making my pulse jump. Ethan again. But this time there was no angry voicemail. No accusations. Just one text. I am sorry. Please do not contact me anymore. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. Ethan had never apologized for anything in his life. Not the screaming. Not the manipulation. Not the bruises. Nothing. Yet somehow one message from Damien DeLuca erased months of fear overnight. What did you do? I asked quietly. Damien walked toward the coffee table and poured himself black coffee instead of whiskey this time. I had a conversation. That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting. Frustration rose inside my chest unexpectedly. You do not get to decide things for me just because you have money and men in black suits following you everywhere. Damien looked at me carefully over the rim of his coffee cup. Calm. Unreadable. You are angry because I protected you. I am angry because you think you own the right to. Silence settled heavily between us again. I expected him to argue. Instead, Damien lowered the cup slowly and nodded once. Fair. That single word caught me completely off guard. Fair. You are right. His voice stayed low and steady. I am not used to asking permission when something threatens people I care about. My breath caught slightly at the word care. Damien noticed immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. Before either of us could say another word, the elevator doors opened sharply across the room. The same guard from earlier stepped inside quickly, his expression tense now. Victor Kane is here. Every muscle in Damien's body went still. How? He bypassed security downstairs. The air changed instantly again. Colder. Heavier. Damien set the coffee cup down untouched before turning toward me. Go upstairs. What? Now, Claire. His voice sharpened for the first time since I met him. Not loud. Controlled. Dangerous. I hated how quickly fear curled through my stomach at hearing it. I am not hiding in some locked room while you talk to whoever this is. Damien crossed the room toward me fast enough to make my breath catch. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see exhaustion hidden beneath the intensity in his dark eyes. Listen to me carefully. His voice dropped lower. Victor Kane enjoys finding weak points in people. And I am yours. The question escaped before I could stop it. Damien froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. The hesitation. The truth. That, he said quietly, is exactly the problem. The elevator doors opened again before I could answer. A tall man stepped into the penthouse wearing a charcoal coat dusted with melting snow and a smile that never reached his pale eyes. Victor Kane looked wealthy in the same polished way Damien did, but colder somehow. Crueler around the edges. He noticed me immediately. Of course he did. Men like him noticed everything too. Victor's smile widened slightly. So the rumors are true. Damien moved subtly between us without touching me. Protective. Instant. Victor laughed softly under his breath. Interesting. Snow swirled outside the windows while silence stretched across the room sharp as broken glass. Then Victor looked directly at me and spoke words that turned the blood cold in my veins. You should ask him what happened to the last woman he loved. Some truths do not arrive loudly. They slip into the room quietly and poison the air before anyone can stop them. Victor Kane stood near the elevator with snow melting slowly from his coat while Damien remained between us like a wall carved from stone. Neither man raised his voice. Neither needed to. Tension filled the penthouse so heavily it felt difficult to breathe. I looked from Victor to Damien carefully, waiting for someone to deny what had just been said. Damien stayed silent. That terrified me more than any explanation could have. Victor noticed immediately. Ah, he said softly. So she does not know. Leave, Damien said coldly. Victor smiled slightly. You know, I almost missed seeing you like this. His pale eyes shifted toward me again. 3 years mourning one woman. Then suddenly another appears and you forget how dangerous attachment makes you. Enough. Damien's voice sharpened low enough to make the room feel colder instantly. Victor lifted one hand casually. Relax. I only came because half of Manhattan noticed your sudden interest in a violinist wearing red. My pulse stumbled again. You have people watching him? Victor laughed softly. Everyone watches Damien DeLuca. Damien turned toward me slowly then. Claire. Go upstairs. No, my voice surprised even me. Both men looked at me immediately. I swallowed hard but forced myself to continue. I am tired of everyone speaking around me like I am not standing here. Victor's smile widened slightly with amusement. Damien looked exhausted suddenly. Deeply exhausted. This is not your world. Maybe not, I whispered, but somehow I ended up inside it anyway. Silence stretched between us while snow drifted beyond the windows in endless white spirals. Finally Victor straightened his coat and headed back toward the elevator. "Careful, Damien." His voice lost its humor completely. "The last time you loved someone, the city burned for it." Then he disappeared behind the closing elevator doors. The silence afterward felt enormous. Damien remained motionless near the windows while Manhattan glowed cold and silver beyond him. I stared at his back for several long seconds before speaking quietly. What did he mean? Damien closed his eyes briefly like the question physically hurt him. "Claire." "No," I stepped closer before fear could stop me. "Do not shut down again. Not now." He finally turned toward me slowly, and something inside my chest tightened painfully at the expression on his face. Not anger. Grief. Raw grief hidden beneath years of control. "Elena died because someone wanted to hurt me," he said quietly. The room fell completely still. I barely breathed. Damien looked toward the fireplace. Instead of at me now. She was supposed to meet me at a charity dinner downtown. I was late. His voice roughened slightly around the edges. By 12 minutes. Snow tapped softly against the glass windows while morning light filled the penthouse in pale silver. "Damien, I spent years building power." A bitter smile touched his mouth briefly before disappearing. "Money. Influence. Fear. I thought those things protected people." He looked at me then. Directly at me. "They do not." Something fragile cracked quietly inside me hearing that. Because this man carried guilt like chains wrapped around his lungs. "It was not your fault," I whispered softly. Damien laughed once under his breath. "Empty. That is what everyone says." He crossed the room slowly until only a few feet separated us. "But every person who gets close to me eventually pays for it." My heartbeat stumbled painfully against my ribs because suddenly I understood why he looked at me the way he did. Like wanting me near him frightened him more than enemies ever could. "That is why you pushed me upstairs," I realized quietly. "You were afraid." Damien stared at me silently for several seconds before answering. "Terrified." The honesty in that one word hit harder than anything else tonight. Outside, Manhattan finally disappeared beneath heavy snowfall while soft gray morning swallowed the skyline whole. I looked at the exhausted man standing before me and realized something dangerous then. Damien DeLuca was not afraid of losing power. He was afraid of surviving another funeral. His gaze dropped briefly toward the bruise fading near my wrist before lifting back to my eyes again. "You should leave before this becomes worse for you." My chest tightened painfully at the quiet resignation in his voice. Like he already expected me to walk away. Instead, I stepped closer. Close enough to see the exhaustion hidden beneath every careful breath he took. "Damien," I whispered softly, "you are the first person who ever made me feel safe." And for the first time since I met him, the most dangerous man in Manhattan looked completely shattered. People think healing happens all at once. Like sunlight breaking through clouds. They are wrong. Real healing sounds quieter than that. It sounds like a man finally sleeping through the night. It sounds like laughter returning to rooms that forgot how to hold it. 1 year later, Manhattan glittered beneath fresh February snow again, but this time Damien DeLuca did not buy every rose in the city. He did not lock himself inside a penthouse filled with ghosts. And he did not spend Valentine's Eve morning beside a fireplace alone. I stood on the rooftop terrace of a private building overlooking Central Park with snowflakes melting slowly against the sleeves of my cream-colored coat. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers while candlelight flickered beneath glass lanterns around the rooftop garden. Small. Quiet. Beautiful. Nothing like the enormous galas Damien used to attend. That part surprised the city more than anything. People still whispered his name in expensive restaurants and private clubs. They still lowered their voices when he walked into rooms. But something about him had changed over the past year. The sharp emptiness inside his eyes softened now. Not completely. Grief never disappears completely. But he looked alive again. I heard footsteps behind me before warm fingers brushed gently against my hand. Damien. I turned toward him slowly, and my chest tightened the same way it always did when I saw him. Black wool coat. Dark hair touched lightly with snow. Strong hands no longer trembling from exhaustion. But it was his eyes that undid me every single time. They no longer looked hollow. Tired sometimes. Haunted occasionally. Human always. Damien glanced toward the skyline quietly before looking back at me. You are cold. I smiled softly. You say that every 10 minutes. Because you refuse to dress appropriately for winter. His hand slid more firmly around mine while he pulled me gently closer beneath the outdoor heater. 1 year ago that possessiveness would have terrified me. Now it simply felt like home. Snow drifted around us slowly while Manhattan glowed gold beneath the dark sky. Somewhere below, traffic moved endlessly through the city that once nearly swallowed both of us whole. Damien studied me quietly for a moment before speaking again. Your mother called me this morning. I groaned immediately. Oh no. A faint smile touched his mouth. Real this time. Warm enough to steal my breath. She wanted to thank me again for the new hospital wing. Damien. Heat rushed into my cheeks. You cannot keep secretly donating millions of dollars to things connected to me. Apparently I can. I laughed softly despite myself, and for a second Damien simply stared at me like the sound still amazed him. Like happiness remained something fragile he could barely believe existed. Then his expression shifted slightly quieter. More serious. Claire. The way he said my name made my heart beat slow immediately. What? Snow melted softly against his dark coat while city lights reflected in his eyes. Do you remember what you said to me the morning after we met? I smiled faintly. Probably something awkward. You said I was the first person who ever made you feel safe. His thumb brushed gently across my knuckles. Nobody has ever said something more dangerous to me. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside my chest. Because I understood now. Loving Damien had never been easy for him. Every good thing in his life once came attached to loss. Grief taught him to expect funerals at the end of every love story. But somehow we survived that fear together. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. I stepped closer until snow landed softly in his dark hair while warm city light wrapped around us both. You know what I realized? I whispered. Damien looked down at me quietly. What? I smiled softly before answering. You stopped looking at the world like it already took everything from you. Silence settled gently between us after that. Not painful silence this time. Peaceful silence. Damien stared at me for several long seconds before his forehead rested lightly against mine beneath the falling snow. You brought me back to life, Claire. My chest ached hearing the quiet truth in his voice. Somewhere beyond the rooftop, Manhattan shimmered beneath Valentine lights and winter skies while the man once feared by an entire city held my hand like it was the only thing keeping him warm. And maybe it was. Because in the end, Damien DeLuca did not need another empire. He did not need more money or power or fear. He only needed one reason to stop mourning long enough to live again.